to help you this afternoon with a jam-packed afternoon where we're going to have a look at the eye as well as the ear. So grade 12s, this is a very important section of the work that you need to do, and let's get away. Like I said, it's going to be a very busy afternoon because we need to do two very important sections of the work. First of all, we're going to have a look at the eye. So let's quickly go and see what's the different parts of the eye. And if I go to my slides and we'll have a look at the eye, we can see that the eye has different parts that you need to identify. So when they give you a question like this, which is the cross section through the eye, you have to identify the different sections. So first of all, we're going to see on the outside there's the cornea. Now the cornea is responsible for the refraction of light rays. So if I look at my model here in front, you can see, if I turn it to the side, I can see that this section here is the cornea, and that's the part where light rays, so if I use now my pencil and I have a look at light rays, you know that light rays move in a straight line. If it hits the cornea, it needs to be reflected through the cornea, through this front section of the eye, so that it can go into the pupil, that is this opening that we see here. All right, so the cornea, very important, is responsible for the first reflection of light rays. The next part of the eye is then the suspensory ligaments. Now the suspensory ligaments is responsible to hold the lens in place. Now we can't see it in my model. I'm going to open the eye just now and then we will see the lens, but they won't show us that suspensory ligaments. Right, the next section of the eye is then our pupil. Now you remember that I showed you that that's the opening. So if I use my pointer here, we can see that this opening that we see here, that is the pupil. So if they give you a picture like that, it's important that you identify. They will use a little bracket to open, to demonstrate or to show this opening here, and that is then our pupil. It is controlled with the iris. The iris is the color part of your eye, and in your iris you will have muscles that will contract or relax to open our pupil. Next section is then this chamber that you see in front. It is filled with water, and that just makes sure that fluids and oxygen will enter into this area to make sure that all the cells get the food that they need, and it helps with the shape of the cornea as well as bending the light rays. Next part of the eye is then the iris. So the iris plays a role in our pupillary mechanism that we're going to do just now. So inside our iris, that's the colored part of the eye, it controls the diameter, the opening of the pupil that we see here. Right, the next part of our eye is the lens. Now the lens will change shape so that we can see different distances. So if we see an object close by, our lens will change shape, and if we look far, it will change shape again. So if I go back to my model again and I take this part out and I open it up, let me do it here in front so that you all can see nicely, then we can see here I'm taking out the lens, and we can see that the lens has got a very specific shape so that it can bend the light rays. So once again, if I use my pencil, we can see that the light rays will move to the cornea. It will bend, go through the opening, which is the pupil, and then it will go through our lens, and the lens will control where our focus point is, right there at the back of the eye, because that's where all our nerve endings in the retina is allocated. So it is important that a clear focus image is on the back side of our eye. So our lens is very, very important. Back to the slides. So if we go further, that vitreous humerus area is then the area that we see in the back of the eye. It's like a gel-like substance, and it just helps to keep the shape of the eye. If I make a cut through my sclera, the white part of the eye, and this jelly-like substance, the vitreous humor, moves out, my whole eye will fall flat. So it helps to keep the shape of the eye. Then there's a very specific area in our eye, and that's right at the back where our nerve moves out of the eye, and that is the blind spot. So right here at the back of the eye, there's an area where there's no nerve cells, no rods and no cones. And that's where if a light rays fall on this area, there will be no vision, because there's no nerve cells. The whole nerve ending move out of this area, and it is part of the optic nerve that carries the impulse to the brain. Now, if you see a label like this, it's very important that you must identify what area of the brain this optic nerve carries the impulse, and that is, of course, the cerebrum. In the cerebrum of the brain, it will interpret the nerve impulses. Right, then we've got another little spot in the eye. So besides the blind spot, we've also got a yellow spot, and that has the greatest number of cones, which means the sharpest image will be allocated in this area right there at the back of the eye, which is the yellow spot. Then we've got the choroid area, which is the dark colored layer, which reduces reflection, and it's also rich in blood vessel, which supplies the cell of the eye with nutrients and oxygen. Now, if I go quickly to my model again, you remember that I removed this dark area. Now, if we just have a look at this model, we can see that there's a lot of veins running in this area. So all the nutrients and the oxygen enters into the cell, and it needs to supply these tissue with the important substances, and that's why it's dark in color. And most of you must have experienced where it's a light, shiny, lightful day, and you walk into an area where there's, for instance, a white wall, and then there's a lot of reflection happening. Then we have to squint our eyes because we can't see. Now, if we didn't have this dark area in our eye, the same would have sensation we would have experienced. So it's important that the choroid absorb all the light rays that is not necessary for us to have a sharp vision. Right, and then the sclera. Now, the sclera is the tough white outer coat which protects the eye against damage. It is part of the cornea, or should I say the cornea. It moves into the sclera area, which is the white part of the eye. then the retina. Very important. It contains this light-sensitive receptor cells, which we call rods and cones. Right, now the next very important section of the eye is then the pupillary mechanism. Grade 12s, the possibility that they're going to ask either the pupillary mechanism or the accommodation of the eye is very high. So make sure that you understand this part of the work very, very well. I always tell my learners, you start here, you learn this, and you have to know it off by heart. Now, your pupillary mechanism's got to do with light. If you move from a dark to a light area or from a light area to a dark area, something happens within your eye to protect your retina. Remember now again what we said, that the retina is the light sensitive area of your eye. And I'm sure your parents or your your teacher might have told you, don't look into the sun, it's bad for your eyes, you're going to damage your eyes. So your body needs to make sure that it protects itself from too much sunlight entering into the eye, and it might damage the retina. And for that, we've got then the pupillary mechanism. So on the slide, we see that the pupillary mechanism is a reflex action. You cannot control it. And it will, the size of the pupil is controls the amount of light that enters into the eye. So here on our picture, we can see how this pupil dilate, how this pupil enlarge in diameter as the person might move from a light area into a dark area. You move from outside to inside the school building. The pupillary mechanism, like I said, is a reflex action, and it is controlled by the iris of the eye. When you learn it, I suggest you learn one of the two, because you might get confused if you learn both. So if you either learn when I go into a light area, what happens to my eye, and then I remember if I go into the dark, it's just the opposite. It just helps you not to get confused between the two. So let's quickly look in a bright light area. What happens? We see that the radial muscle of the iris relax. Then the circulary muscle of the iris contracts. The pupil constricts, or it becomes smaller, and less light enters into the eye. So if they give you a question like that, it normally counts 3 marks. So I suggest you use your hands for that. Think about it. If I go into a light area, I go outside, there's a lot of light that is going to enter into my eye. So what needs to happen? My pupil, which is a hole, needs to go smaller. So what will contract is my circulary muscle, which is round, will contract. So it will close my pupil to make it smaller. Now there's always 2 muscles, and they work opposite to one another. And the other muscle is then the radial muscle. Now the radial muscle, I always tell my learners, it's like opening a curtain or closes a curtain. So if my circulary muscle contract, making my pupil smaller, then my radial muscle needs to relax. And that's when I move into an area with a lot of light. If I move into an area that is dark, so now I need to see more, my pupil needs to dilate to become bigger. What will happen? These round muscles, my circulary muscle will relax, and my radial muscle will contract. It will pull my pupil to dilate my pupil. Back to the slide, make sure that you are able to identify by looking at a picture. So if I look at this picture, I can see that the pupil is small, and therefore this person must be in an area of bright light. The opposite, if there's a dim light, like I said, then in that case your radial muscle of the iris will contract, your circulatory muscle of the iris will relax, the pupil will dilate, it will enlarge, and more light will enter. Now be careful, when you write it, you must mention the radial muscle of what? Of the iris. Don't leave this part out when you write the answer, because a lot of times they will not mark it correct. You have to write this whole sentence of the radial muscle of the iris contract and the circulatory muscle of the iris relax, and then the pupil dilates. Look at this word, and more light will enter into the eye. A very, very important section of the work. Make sure you understand it. The chances of you getting this question either now in record exams or at the end of the year is very big. Right, our next one is then accommodation of the eye. Now, accommodation of the eye has got to do with a series of changes that takes place in the shape of the lens. You remember that I showed you the lens here of my model, just to remind you again. You remember this shape? Now this shape needs to change depending on where I'm going to look, whether I'm going to look at an object that is close by or an object that is far, that I need to look far from. Right, so what changes is going to happen in my lens as a response to distance? So accommodation's got to do with distance, where I'm just reminding you again, because a lot of time you get confused. Papillary mechanisms got to do with the amount of light, bright light and dim light. Right, so what happens? If there's a distant vision, so you look at an object that is far, first of all, my ciliary muscle, now the ciliary muscle is this area here, will relax. That means that the ciliary body moves further away from the lens. Because the ciliary body moves further away from my lens, the ligaments that holds this lens in position will tighten. The tension on the lens will increase, and that means that the lens will become less convex. So you can see that in this case, seeing that I'm looking for, my lens is flatter in shape. The light rays are reflected less, and then the light rays are focused on the retina. Now the retina is this back part of the eye, and the image falls then on the retina. So if we look far, our lens will be flat in shape. If we go to accommodation where we've got near vision, so you're busy reading and studying, what will happen? Look at our lens. Our lens is rounder in shape. So the ciliary muscle contract. Now where is our ciliary muscle? That's the area here. That will contract. Our ciliary body moves closer to the lens, and seeing that it moves closer to the lens, there's less tension on our suspensory ligaments. So our suspensory ligaments slacken. The tension on the lens decrease, which means our lens will become more convex. Light rays are reflected more, and light rays falls then once again on the back of the retina, and where an image is then formed. Now, how will you learn it? The best part is once again to use your hands. So I'll tell my learners, use your hands when you study, and remind yourself, if I read and I look down, my lens will become more convex. If I look far, so when I look here, my lens is convex. When I look up, my lens will become flatter. And by using your hands the whole time, you are reminding yourself what happens to your lens. Now, once again, it's easy to get confused. So, grade 12s, I suggest you learn one of the two, and remember then the other one is just the opposite. Otherwise, you might once again get confused between the two. Right, let's quickly have a look at the type of question that they might ask you in connection with this type of work. We've got a question here. The diagram below represents the structure of the human eye. Right, so if we look at this diagram, they identify the iris there. Now I'm wondering, what is B? Look at the brackets. You can see they point to this opening, which means that it is our pupil. A goes to this section, which is our lens. And C is pointed towards this back area of the eye, and the back area is then the retina. All right, so we need to give the function. First of all, the function of A. Remember now, A is our lens. So the function of the lens is refraction of light, or it focuses light rays on the retina. C, which is the retina, it converts light stimuli into impulses. So very important, that's where the rods and the cones is. So it's the conversion of light stimulus to an impulse. I'm going to skip this section of the work because we've got a lot of work that we need to do. I just quickly want to have a look at question 1.3. They say, describe how the iris controls the amount of light entering the eye when a person is exposed to bright light. Now, I remind you the two very important sections of the work, the pupillary mechanism and accommodation. Which one of the two is it? Let's have a look. They talk about light. So if it's light, it's the pupillary mechanism, and that's the bullets where the radial muscle, once again, of what? The iris relax. The circulatory muscle of the iris contract. You see they mention it twice. The pupil will constrict and less light enter into the eye. If we quickly have a look at eye defects. Now this, in the eye, a lot of times they actually ask eye defects. So make sure that you are able to identify the different eye defects. There's 4 that you need to learn. Short-sightedness, far-sightedness, astigmatism, and then cataract. Quickly have a look at the diagrams and let's see if we can identify the different eye defects. First one is short-sightedness. Now remember, short-sightedness is where you can see close. You're more than happy to read your textbook, but when you look up, you cannot see. So the problem is, remember, it's got to do with accommodation. So let's just go back to our hands and think about it. If I read, then it means that my lens is round. So my lens can have a nice round shape, it can be convex. The problem is when I look up, where my lens is supposed to go more flat, I'm battling, the lens doesn't want to do it. So I need to use glasses to fix that problem of my lens. Now the question is, what type of lens will my doctor, or will I get into my reading glasses? Will I get a lens that is more round? Is that my problem? So let's just quickly go back. When I read, my lens is round. Now I look up, I want my lens to be more flat. What type of lens will the doctor prescribe? Will it give me a lens that is more round? Is that my problem? Or is my problem actually that my lens is not turning more flatter? That's my problem. It's not turning more flat. So the doctor needs to give me a lens that will accommodate, that will fix this problem that I've got with my the lens inside my eye. On the diagram, we see this, that if we've got then short-sightedness, the doctor must prescribe a concave lens. There you can see, so the concave lens, what it does, it first bends the light rays outwards, and then my lens, which is too round, will bend the light inwards so that the image will be focused on the back of the eye. What causes it? It might be that my eyeball is too long, or it can be that the cornea is too curved, or it might be that the lens is unable to become less convex. This is the eye defect that you see quite often now in youth, because you guys are always on your cell phone. So it's a disease that you can see quite often in teenagers. So you remember to look up more often and leave your cell phones more alone so that you don't have an eye defect. The next one is the old disease. When you become older, you cannot see close by. So there's nothing wrong with you looking far. The person can see distant objects, but as soon as they need to see near, they battle. All right, so now the question is, what's wrong with the eye? I go back to my hands. So that means if I look up and I look at to the TV screen on the other side of the room, my lens is perfectly turning flat. So there's no problem. But when I want to read the paper here in front of me, my lens is supposed to become more convex, but it doesn't want to do that. So now the doctor needs to prescribe what type of lens? A lens that makes my eye lens more flat or more round? I wonder if you've got the answer for this question. Let's see on the picture what we need to get. Right, so there's the normal vision, but the problem with long-sightedness, there you can see this lens is too round, and now it focused there at the back, and in this case we need to have a convex lens. The doctor needs to prescribe a convex lens so that the image will fall on the back of the retina. What can cause it? First of all, it might be that the eyeball is too short, or it can be that the cornea is not curved enough, or the lens is unable to become more convex. And like I said, quite often with older people, they will experience this eye defect. The two other eye defects is astigmatism, and that's where the curvature of the lens or the cornea is uneven. Your cornea must be an even shape so that the light rays will be bent evenly. Now if it's uneven, there will be a distorted image on the retina, and for that glasses and lens that is correctly shaped must be prescribed. There can be also laser surgery to try to fix this problem. Cataract, a very common question that I like to ask in section 1.2 of an exam paper is where the lens becomes cloudy, and if it becomes cloudy, the light cannot reach the retina, and that causes then blurred vision. Once again, they can fix it by replacing the lens with a synthetic lens. A lot of people go for laser surgery to fix cataract. Right, that is then the eye. I'm going to skip the questions with the eye, seeing that we need to do the ear as well. Like I told you, it's going to be a jam-packed afternoon. So let's move over to the ear. Now, grade 12s, the ear is not that difficult, but there's a lot of terminology that makes it sometimes hard for you guys to learn. So here we've got a picture of the ear. Let's quickly identify the different parts. So we've got the outer part of the ear, which is the pinna, and then from there it moves into the ear channel, and the ear channel will end in a membrane which we'll call the tympanic membrane, and that divides the ear from the outer ear into the middle ear. Now the middle ear consists out of these ossicles, which is small bones, and then there's a little window there behind one of these ossicles, which we call the oval window, and there's another window that we see here, which is the round window, and then we've got this very important tube, the Eustachian tube. Now this Eustachian tube enters into our throat, and we're going to have a look at it just now and explain what role it plays. That is our middle ear. From there we move into our inner ear, and this part is inside bone, and there's different areas. We've got this circulatory channels, the semicircular channels, and we've got this one that we call the cochlea, and then there's the auditory nerve that goes to different parts of the brain. Right, now if we focus first of all in this middle part, it is important that you know the function of the Eustachian tube. Now the Eustachian tube is responsible to make sure that the pressure on both sides of the tympanic membrane is the same. So if you swallow, your Eustachian tube is busy regulating the air pressure inside this middle ear to make sure that our tympanic membrane can vibrate, and there's movement for the ossicles to convert this impulse or this movement, this vibration over to this window that we see here, the oval window. Now how do we hear? Let's first start with hearing. So there is sound. Remember, sound is a wave, and the pinna traps and it directs the sound waves into the external auditory channel. All right, so let's quickly look at my model that I brought here. So I've got a huge giant ear. This pinna that we see here, there's a reason why your ear's got this shape. It channels the sound waves. Now remember that sound is a wave, so it makes this wave and then it channels it, right? Let me use my pencil again, so that it goes into this channel all the way to the membrane that we see here, your tympanic membrane. So as the sound goes through, it will hit this tympanic membrane, and then the tympanic membrane will start to vibrate. It's like a speaker. If you play the music hard and you put your hand on your speaker, you will feel how that speaker is busy vibrating. And that's the same thing that happens to our tympanic membrane. Now if we look at the model again and we see that this membrane is then vibrating, both the ossicles that we see here, it can be maybe a bit difficult on our model, will start to move, and it will put pressure on this round area here. Maybe the picture on the screen will help us to explain it a bit better. So as the sound waves enter into our external auditory channel, it will put pressure on the tympanic membrane. And then we've got these ossicles, the hammer, alveoli, and stipules, that will start to move. And right here at the oval window, it will put pressure, and it will make almost like a piston action against this membrane that we see here, this oval window that we've got here. Right, so there goes the sound waves. The tympanic membrane will vibrate, and the vibration are transmitted to the auditory ossicles. And the ossicles, the function of the ossicles is to amplify the vibration and transmit it to the oval window. So remember, this is sound waves, this is then vibration, and the function of the ossicles is to amplify the vibration to the oval window. From there, the oval window vibrates, creating then pressure waves. So we go from sound waves to vibrations to pressure waves. And within this inner ear, there's a liquid, a fluid, where the pressure waves is created, and that will then stimulate the organ of Corti to convert the waves into an impulse. So right in our cochlea, there's a specific area where all the nerve cells are, and we call it the organ of Corti, and that will convert then the waves into an impulse. And the impulse travels along the auditory nerve. Once again, grade 12s, please don't say to the brain. You must identify what area of the brain, and the area is the cerebrum, where this impulse is then interpreted. How does balance work? Balance is the process in which receptors in the inner ear detects change in the position of the head and responds to gravity, as well as the change in speed and direction of the body. So balance got to do with basically two different things. First of all, your head's position according to gravity, then as well as the speed and direction of your body. And for that, we use the receptor, the crista, which got to do with speed, and it's within the ampulla, which is this semicircular channel And then we've got the macula, which got to do with gravity. And that's in the saccule and utricle of the vestibular. Now that's where I tell you there's a lot of words that you need to know. So if I go to my model, and I'm going to focus now on this area here, this is where hearing and the organ of Corti is. So if you're busy listening to my voice, this is where the impulses are situated and stimulated. But when we sit up straight or we look around, our balance is allocated in the area that we see here, the semicircular channels. Now, if I look at this model and I turn it a little bit to this on the screen, then you can see right there at the bottom, there's an area that is enlarged. And that's where we find the crista. And the crista's got to do with the speed and the direction of your head. So if you move, I'm busy driving, there's water inside this channel that will move back and forth, and it will pull onto nerve cells, and that's why you know that you're busy moving. So if I tilt my head forward, the water inside this channel will move, and that's how I know that my head is moving up and down, up and down. Right, the other area that we see is right here, this area here. There's two areas which we call the saccular and the utriculus, and that's where gravity. So my body knows that my head is up straight. If I go to bed tonight and I lie down on my pillow, then I'm going to tilt my head, and then my body will get there will be receptors that tells me that I'm lying on my side, and that's the macula that is allocated in this area that we see here. So once again, it's important that you know the difference between the two. The one's got to do with my position. I know that I'm sitting up straight. When I make this movement with my head, some area inside my ear needs to tell me I'm busy moving my head up and down, and that is the crista that tells me that. Right, on the slides, let me quickly recap. So the balance is brought about by the receptor, the crista, and that tells me there's speed and direction, and that's in the semicircular channel. Gravity, the fact that you know that you sit up straight, your teacher tells you sit up straight, it's the macula. There's nerve ends in your macula that tells you that you are sitting up straight. Where is the macula situated? In the saccule and utriculus of the vestibular. Right, so containing special receptors, which we call the macula, are stimulated, and when the position of the head changes, the pull of gravity stimulates it, and then we've got the sensory hair cells in the macula that converts the stimulus into impulse. There you can see this guy is moving his head up and down. There's the nerve cells, and that converts then the impulse. It sends the impulse to the cerebellum of the brain. So your cerebellum plays a role in balance. Then the cerebellum will send impulses to our skeleton muscle, and our skeleton muscle will help us then to maintain balance. The ampulla, remember now the ampulla is in the semicircular channels. There's a specific receptor which we call the crista. It will detect sudden change in the speed and direction of the body. Here you can see at the bottom how it moves from the one side to the other, and that will then detect the direction of the body, and that causes then the indolence to move in at least one of the semicircular channels. The movement of the indolence stimulates the crista in the ampulla to convert the stimuli into impulse, which is then sent to the auditory nerve once again in the cerebellum. Once again, the cerebellum sends impulses to the skeleton muscle to maintain balance. Let's quickly have a look at the type of question that they might ask you. So once again, they give you a diagram of the human ear, and we need to identify the different parts. We need to identify A, which is this area here, and that is our pinna. Then B points to this area here, which is our ear channel. And then C is these little small structures that we see here, and that is our ossicles, the smallest bones in our body. And then D is this area here. Remember, we've just discussed what type of impulse is generated in D, and that is our semicircular channels. So just by looking at this part of the ear, let's quickly remind ourselves. The semicircular channels, it's got to do with movement of the ear. I know when I drive, it's this part that works. You are sitting up straight, it's this part of the ear that moves. You're busy listening to what I'm telling you, it's this part of the ear that works. Right, so write down the letter only the letter of the part which conducts sound waves towards the middle ear. So what part conducts the sound waves to the middle ear? I wonder if you guys can get the answer of this one. It is of course B that conducts it to the middle ear. Which one absorbs the pressure from the inner ear? That is G. The pressure of the inner ear is of course your round window. So as the pressure moves through the cochlea, it needs to move out of the ear again, and that goes via the round window. Then it ensures equal pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. Very important is of course this section here, and that's the Eustachian tube that you find here, which is F. And then D, transmit vibration to the inner ear. What will transmit vibration will be of course C, that transmitted to the inner ear. And then contains the organ of Corti. The organ of Corti plays a role in hearing, and what part helps us to hear is this section here, which is the cochlea. Right, next question. A very common question that is asked a lot of time is what happens if part E becomes blocked. For instance, you've got flu, then this area is blocked, and you might have noticed as soon as you've got flu and a runny nose, suddenly you can't hear as nicely. So the problem with that is that our ossicles will not vibrate freely. Why can't it vibrate? Because the pressure cannot be the same on both sides of our tympanic membrane, because this tube is then blocked. Now suddenly it cannot vibrate freely, and that causes us to become partial deafness, or we can't hear as nicely. So the ossicles will not vibrate freely to transmit vibrations to the inner ear, and it causes then partial deafness. Or you can say it cannot equalize the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane, leading to pain, or you can get maybe middle ear infection, or you can get that your eardrum might burst, or vibration are not being transmitted, which will also lead to partial deafness. What will happen if part A has a hole in? Now, if your tympanic membrane's got a hole in, it will not be able to vibrate. Think about a balloon. If you blow a balloon and there's a hole in your balloon, you know that you cannot blow your balloon up. That's the same thing that will happen to our tympanic membrane. That tympanic membrane needs to vibrate as the sound waves hit our tympanic membrane. It must push the tympanic membrane back and forth so that you'll be able to hear. Now, if I've got a hole and this sound wave moves against my tympanic membrane, but now there's a hole, so the sound movement can actually, or the waves can actually move through my membrane. This membrane will not vibrate, and then sound will not be generated the way that it's supposed to be. So once again, you might have a bit of hearing loss due to that hole that is inside your ear. And then how does part A and C work together to amplify sound? The tympanic membrane has a large surface area that than the oval window, and incoming sound waves will be concentrated on a smaller surface area, and sound is therefore amplified. Once again, a very common question that is asked. I quickly want to skip these questions and end today's session with two ear defects. The one is where you get middle ear infection, and we've mentioned that is when your Eustachian tube is blocked. How do they treat it? With grommets. A very, very, grade 12 is a very common answer in a lot of exam papers. And how can you fix deafness? By having a cochlea implant or hearing aids, depending of course where the problem within the ear is allocated. Right, grade 12, it's been a jam-packed afternoon. I hope that you all learned a lot. Good luck, and I'll see you soon. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.